Well, we're going to get started here. Thanks so much for everyone who has showed up so far to our May sessions, and welcome to May sessions. This is our very first evening when we're putting this on together. I'm very excited. My name is Scott Marble, for those who don't know me, and I'm the discipleship pastor here at Emmanuel. And we've been working towards these May sessions for a couple of months now. And guess what? We're being forced to sort of pivot and do this a little bit differently than we would normally do. So here we are online meeting over Zoom. And hopefully we're going to have a great session tonight on leadership. And tonight we're talking with a man who needs no introduction, but he's for sure going to get a great introduction. Brendan, who is our executive pastor. I'm going to let him introduce himself a little bit. So Brendan, tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, who you are, where you come from.
Totally. So Scott, first of all, thanks for having me be your guinea pig. This is awesome. And before I introduce myself, what I'm going to do is, we don't get an opportunity to do this publicly enough, is I just want to say a massive thank you to you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you.
Because like you say, it's really easy for Kent to preach to a camera, same as it is for him to preach to people, right? But
he's a pro.
Your job is people and its community. So massive thanks. Great job to help people find community, but also find Jesus through this time. So we don't say it enough, man, but thanks for being on our team, because you're doing great work.
Thank you.
So I just had to get that in there. You can give me the $10 later.
Okay.
But yeah, so to introduce myself, the most important thing I can tell you about me is I am married to Brendan. We've been married for about 11 years now. And she's pretty awesome. I like her. We have 5 kids: Silas, Adoniah, Malachi, Amaya, and Israel. I've been practicing that.
Nice. That's good.
Got it.
You really rattled that off well.
It's written down in front of me, but I've got it. And yeah, so we love our family. We've been in Steinbach now for a couple of years, and love it. It's been a lot of fun so far. So for me, I've been here in this role, like I said, for about 2 years. Before that, I've worked in 2 different churches. So about 10 years worth of ministry experience, leading small ministries, leading large ministries, and now here at Emmanuel. And before that, with the federal government for about 5 or 6 years, leading a department of about 250 people. So
cool.
Been leading for a little bit, and I just love it. I love seeing people thrive in their areas of responsibility where they have influence. It's so cool to watch people rise up and do awesome things. So
yeah. Cool. Well, I think as we get started here, maybe we should establish some ground rules. So if this is our first time talking about leadership, what should we know going into this whole topic?
Yeah. So a couple things that I think are really important is, one is leadership has nothing to do with the title that you bear, right? We often mistake that. It says, I'm a manager at work, I'm a supervisor, I own the company. Well, good for you. But leadership has absolutely nothing to do with that title. If you have influence, you have leadership. That's just the truth. It's that simple. Yeah. So if you're a parent, you've got leadership. If you're a friend, you've got leadership. Yeah, if you're a manager, supervisor, owner, whatever it is at work, yeah, you've got influence, you've got leadership. But so do schoolmates, so do teammates, so do neighbors. Lots of people have that influence. So it's really, really important to remember that. And the second thing that we need to remember is, I think it's just as simple as that. What we're going to talk about today, it does come from Scripture and it's faith-based, but Christianity doesn't actually own leadership, right? There's lots of great leadership examples from outside of the church, but there's some great ones inside the church, of course. Jesus was a great leader, I believe that, but Christians don't own good leadership. And so here's what I'll say is that if you're coming into this teaching with kind of like, I'm not sure about this Jesus person or this Jesus thing, this is for you. It's for everybody. So faith-based, not faith-based, this applies to everybody, I would think.
Yeah. Cool. Like you also mentioned just the importance of relationship a little bit in there. What got you onto the topic of why relationship is so important as it relates to this topic? And I'm going to kind of let you just take it from there, and I'm going to fade away in the background and let you kind of go with things after that.
You'll never fade away in the background to me, friend, but we'll talk again with you soon. So for me, I think one of the things that was super important when it comes to relationships and leadership and what this looks like is just that influence that you play in somebody's life, right? We all have that opportunity. It's way more important than a name that shows up on a business card or a title that shows up in there. Way more important. It's relationships. Leadership is all about relationships. And one of the books that I really, really appreciated is The 5 Love Languages by Gary Chapman. Very influential, very important, very life-changing book for a lot of people because it gave them sort of the words and the language to how they're feeling and how they felt honored. And there's a whole bunch of love languages, right? It's words of affirmation, it's physical touch, it's quality time, it's acts of service. There's another one, but I'm forgetting what it is. Somebody will remind me. But we all have different ones. And if you haven't read the book, I'd strongly suggest that you do. For me, I'm all about words of affirmation. Big time, more than anything else. I need to know basically how I'm doing in life. And so for me, when I'm looking at that, like, honestly, you can do your own laundry. You can buy yourself your own gift. You can leave me alone. You can hug somebody else, whatever it is. But for me, my love language is just tell me that I'm awesome. That's all I want to hear. And I want to hear it more and more and more again. And so over the last 3 or 4 years, I've been sort of on this journey of understanding who I am and who I am in Jesus, but also who I am just in general. And what I realized about 3 or 4 years ago was this idea that I lack big time. I lack a lot of self-confidence. I have a lot of self-doubt. And there's always this voice in my head, and I think a lot of us have this, but there's this voice in my head that says, you're not good enough. You're not smart enough. You're not qualified to be doing what you're doing. And so really hard to kind of go through ministry and go through leadership with those voices in your head. And so I start reading this book by Gary Chapman and begin understanding, okay, I need to know, like, why do I matter? Do I matter? Am I making a difference? And whatever else it might be. So that's one of the first things that I realized. And then the second thing that I realized was absolutely staggering. It has a lot to do with relationships and how relationships are built in 2020, because they look way different than 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago. We know that. You've all experienced different versions of that. But if I were to ask you the question, how are you doing? Or if you ask somebody at work, how are you doing? At school, how are you doing? One of the most common responses that we hear is, I'm busy. Okay, that's great, but how are you really doing? Oh man, I'm so busy. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. There's so much going on in my life. I'm so busy. Well, we get it. But there's actually a really interesting study that was released back in 2014. And what it did is it had a bunch of participants kind of self-evaluate how many hours they thought they were working each week. And they came out to an average of 60 hours per week. Now, when the researchers actually audited computer time and office time and how they were actually using their work time, it found out that people were actually working about 30 hours per week. Now, that's not to say that people are lying or trying to get away with something, but what it's actually showing us is that people think they're busier than they are because we're so spread out. We've got so many things going on in our lives. We know that. We know we've got kids sports, we've got family obligations, we've got church, we've got school, we've got work, we've got grocery shopping and yard maintenance, and we've got so many things to do, but we're not actually busier. We've just managed to take more on to our plate. So I've realized that. Now, when you take this with my need for words of affirmation and this understanding that the way we create relationships are different and they're changing, what I actually noticed was there was a study done in the early 90s by a guy by the name of Robin Dunbar. Now, if you're a psychologist or a sociologist, you'll probably be able to correct me really quickly on this, but there's this theory called Dunbar's number. And very simplistic version of it is that there's sort of a bunch of different numbers of friends that you can have. And on one end of the spectrum, it starts with 1,500 people that you could put a face to their name, you could put a name to their face, you could identify and connect who those people were. All the way down to 5 people who are close to you, who you could call in an absolute emergency. They would have your back. They would do anything for you anytime. And what he found was that people were actually about 150 friends that each one of us have. And the definition that he used there is that 150 people that you could get together with uninvited, without embarrassment, and have a beer with them. Or if you're in Steinbach, a Pepsi or something like that. But 150 people is what he thought the number of friends that each person had. 5 is what we could actually handle. So here's what I realized. I need words of affirmation. We're busier than we've ever been, but we think we're busier than we've ever been. And people have way more friends than they've ever had before. So I need these affirmations, and I need people close to me to give me those words of affirmation. Here's the thing, is that if I'm not getting it, how am I going to fill that gap? How am I going to fill this misunderstanding, this miss kind of firing of how many friends I have, or of how many words of affirmation, and how am I filling this idea of, are you good enough? Are you smart enough? Are you whatever enough? Right? We've all thought that. Are we enough? And here's what I realized, is that the good Christian answer is, well, Jesus loves you. Jesus is enough. Jesus is good enough for you. He loves you. He sees what you're doing. That's all true. We know that. But for me, the way I'm wired is I need to know that. I need to see that in the moment, that somebody actually appreciates me and somebody actually cares about me. And here's the tension. And I think a lot of you can probably relate to this, is you have these questions in your head. Why do I feel like I don't matter? Why do I feel like nobody cares about me? Why do I feel like I don't belong? Right? How many of you can actually relate to that question of, why don't I belong in this place? Why don't I fit in? Why does nobody care about me? Why do I not matter? We've all longed for this idea of acceptance, of adoration, of affirmation in ways that we really can't even fully understand. And this is, like I said, this has been a couple of years struggle for me, and I'm being as open and honest and vulnerable with you as I can, that this is really something that I've been struggling with, because I want to get better at it. I want to know that Jesus cares about me. But I know that, right? Because people tell me that I'm supposed to already know. So it's got me thinking. It's got me thinking about this idea that I want to share with you. And it's very brief. It's very simple. There's not a lot of difficulty in what I'm about to tell you, but the Bible's filled with leadership lessons. It's filled with really great leaders. It's filled with people of great examples of biblical leadership. It's filled with bad examples of biblical leadership, right? As you think about through kind of your friend group and your mentors in life, all of us can think of somebody who's led us well and led us poorly. So, I mean, think about that person. Who has led you well in your life? Whether you know them or you don't know them, you just learn from them through a book or whatever it was, but who has led you really, really well? I'd be curious to know that. Because for me, as I'm trying to sort out this answer and sort out this question, what I actually did is I began to look at not the way that Jesus led people, but by the way that Jesus was led. And as I'm flipping through my Bible about 2 years ago, I come to this realization that changed the way I see Scripture, changed the way that I see the people who work with me and for me and around me, and the people that I work for, in ways that I can't even explain. And it comes from one single verse. And I think it might be an overstatement to say it's the most powerful verse in the Bible, but I think it's up there. I think it has to be up there. And it's a verse that's found in all 4 of the Gospels. It comes super early in the recorded ministry of Jesus. It takes place right at the baptism of Jesus. And so what's happening, just to kind of set the background for you, is John's going around, he's baptizing people, and Jesus comes along, and Jesus is like, hey, baptize me. And John's like, not a chance. And Jesus is like, you have to. And John's like, okay, fine. And so he does. And after he baptizes him, we get this one statement, and it's powerful. And I'll tell you why it's powerful. It's powerful because of the words, but it's also powerful because this is the one verbal conversation that God the Father, God the Holy Spirit has with his Son. Now, we know Jesus prayed a lot, and we know that there was more conversations, but this is the one that the writers of the different letters and the books of the Bible chose to include as the one vocal, verbal, out loud conversation, and it blows me away. So now think about this. Before I tell you what it is, if you're not sure of what it is, think about this. You've got the entire book to shape whatever focus and framework of the world you want. Clearly, they had other conversations, and they chose this one thing, and here's what they said. Here's what God said. He said, "This is my son, whom I love, and with him I am well pleased." This is my son, whom I love. With him I am well pleased. That's it. That's it, friends. One sentence, 13 words. This gave Jesus the leadership lesson that he needed. I think it gives us the leadership lesson that we need in ways that we didn't really see coming. It's mind-blowing to me because this checks all the balance, all the boxes of things that I want from my friends and I want from my family and I want from the people around me, but it also checks all the boxes for the people that I want to lead and I want to be a part of their lives. And I'll say this, you can ask my wife about this. In my life, I have a goal. I don't care how much money I make. I don't care what influence I have. I don't care where we live or what we drive or our style, lifestyle. My goal in life is to impact 5 people. That makes more sense there. 5 people in ways that when I'm gone or if I have to move away or whatever it is, they can look and say, man, Brendan really impacted my life. And through this idea of this is my son, whom I love, with him I am well pleased. This is where I begin to get it. Because here's what it is. Affirmation, acceptance, and adoration. Now think about this. This is my son. There's acceptance there. He's saying, this is my son. This is my son that you're looking at. Acceptance. Whom I love. Affirmation. With him, I'm well pleased. Adoration. How impressive, how important is that? Affirmation, adoration, and acceptance. It's the one conversation that God had with Jesus, and these are the 3 principles he chose to share with his son and in turn with all of us a couple thousand years later as well. Now, real quick, in just a couple of minutes, I'm going to bring Scott back into the conversation, but before I do that, I just want to talk about those 3 things very, very quickly, and if you have questions, I would encourage you, Scott's keeping an eye on the questions, I'd encourage you to ask those questions and just think out loud with us. And if you want to submit them by text, you can through the chat feature, or you can let Scott know by raising your hand and he can hook you up as well. But I want to unpack those 3 things real quick, Scott, before I ask you a couple of questions. So affirmation, right? Effectively, it's providing emotional support or encouragement to those around us. Now, tons of science around that you know this. If you get up in the morning, you tell yourself you're awesome and you're the best and you can do it, you can whatever, you're going to feel better. Imagine if that comes from the people around you, right? The people who you respect, the people who care for you. If you're getting that from them, you're bound to do bigger and better things. You have to be. I'm pretty sure of it. If people know that you're on your team, they're going to go to bat for you, right? If you're able, as a leader, if you're able to affirm those people who are around you, they'll do anything for you. It's incredible. Acceptance. Second one, this one's hard for me because I've struggled with this one the most, this idea of imposter syndrome. Scott, I'm not sure if you've ever had kind of that moment of like, I hope they don't realize that I don't know what I'm doing because my job might end here pretty quick, right?
I think every leader feels that, totally.
What's that?
I think every leader feels that at some point in time.
Absolutely. You have to, right? And something about that is it's humbling and all those things, but it's really this idea that I just don't know if I belong here. So when I get that acceptance from other people and that regular assurance, those regular words of, hey, you do belong here. You are a big part of our team. You are important. And life just begins to change. It begins to take off, right? You get respect. It allows us to live out our identity, who we are. It allows us to grow in who we are rather than trying to be someone else or something else. I find it so important. The last one, this idea of adoration. Now, this one might be the biggest one we lack because of family relationships. And I'll let family counselors talk about the idea of adoring people and really loving in a healthy way. But I think it's so important knowing that we're adored for who we are. I think it's life-changing. Now, a couple of kind of caveats just to sort of understand, because when we hear adore in the church, I don't want to make this an idol thing where you should adore your staff or your staff should adore you. That's not what it is, but they are very different things. Right? To love people around you means there's a strong affection, profound, It shows affection. It can mean a million things, right? Love is a verb. It's an action. It's a noun. It's all those things. But adore is to worship. Now, let's be careful for a second. So let's still put Jesus and God above this. But it's really means to love with your entire heart, your entire soul, and to give everything you have to the people who are around you. I think that's so incredible. And I think that think about the way that God adores us, the way that we ought to adore God. Imagine if we were leading in that same way, right? So affirmation, acceptance, and adoration, I think they're so important. So bottom line is, if you're watching this right now, you have people. I don't need to name them for you because you're already thinking about the people who you've got influence over and leadership over. And so let me just ask you a couple of possibly difficult questions. Like, are they getting your affirmation? Are they getting your adoration? Are they getting your acceptance? If so, or if not, why not? Right? Are they aware that you affirm them? Are they aware that you adore them? Are they aware that you accept them? Mm-hmm. One of the things that I try to do all the time with my kids is just tell them, hey, listen, I love you. I'm proud of you. You're doing a really good job. Sometimes they're not. But to let them know that exactly who they are is who God made them to be, Jesus made them to be, is allowing them to flourish and to be really, really important, integral parts of our family. And it's just true, guys, that your kids, they need affirmation. Your friends, they need acceptance for who they are, regardless whether that's good or bad or ugly or clean. They need your acceptance. Your spouse needs your adoration. Coworkers, they need to know that you are for them. And I think your teammates, right? They need to know that you're invaluable, that without you, nothing would be impossible. All of these ideas, affirmation, acceptance, and adoration, I think they're so, so important. And it's just this one verse, right? It's this one verse that I think we skip over it almost, right? Because it's not a throwaway verse. It shouldn't be.
Right.
But for some reason, this idea of this is my son whom I love, with him I'm well pleased. Okay, what's next? That's actually a huge thing. Mm-hmm. So, Scott, I've been talking for a couple of minutes. I'm going to ask you kind of what you thought, if you have any pushback or feedback, or if you have any specific questions. But I also want to know, out of these three things, what stands out to you?
I think affirmation stands out the most to me. One, because I don't feel, although I'm naturally good at it, so I struggle with this one in particular. And then two, I feel like I've experienced in my own life when I've had leaders affirm certain aspects of my abilities or my character or just the way God has made me. It's really, really, truly transformed my life. And also, I will say this too. I've seen it transform other people's lives as well. A number of years ago, I felt really challenged to start to, I called it my affirmation gift. So every year, this is when I was in YWAM, by the way, and so I made like zero money. Every year, I would save up a large amount of money. It would take me like most of the year to save up this amount of money. And I would usually spend that amount of money on a gift. And the qualification of the gift was that the gift was meant to be given to someone to affirm a certain aspect of who they are. And so I would pray about this. I would save up money. And so one year I remember it was what I call the blue guitar. And so I actually was worship coordinator in a church at one point in time, believe it or not. And in this particular year, I worked with a phenomenal worship leader. And I really felt as I worked alongside of her that God had really given her some strong giftings. And he wanted to sort of, I would guess, pin that affirmation in her life. And so I saved up a lot of money and I felt like I should go buy her a guitar because she didn't have an instrument at that point in time. So I took me forever. I went to the guitar store. I literally remember looking at the wall of guitars, all these guitars on the wall, and this one blue guitar stood out to me. And I was like, I feel like I'm supposed to buy this blue guitar, but it's like the ugliest guitar on the wall. So I did it, and I bought all the stuff and the tuners and the cases and all that stuff, and went home that evening, and I invited her and her husband over for supper, and we had some great supper. And then afterwards I said, hey, I have this gift that I've been working a long time, and I've had you in mind. I've been praying about you, and I told her about the whole aspect of like what I see God doing in her, just like the affirmation of it. And I wrote her a letter, and then I brought out this blue guitar, and she opens it up and starts just sobbing, and I'm like, maybe I got the wrong gift. Like, I'm not sure what's going on here. And then she said, you know what? For as long as I can remember, I have always wanted a blue guitar. And
That's
I cannot
awesome.
believe that you knew that and that you bought this for me. And I was blown away by that affirmation, like really, really changed her life and her perspective of like just who she was in God. But also God was in that affirmation too. And I didn't know that he was kind of speaking through me, and I was sort of his mouthpiece.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. I love that story. In a second, I want you to tell us about, I'm putting you on the spot with this one a little bit, but I'm going to share a story of one thing that I really appreciate. But when I'm done, just to give you a little bit of time to think about it, is I'm really curious to hear about where you have been led by one of these three principles, by somebody. They don't have to be above you in an org chart. Like, I mean, you can talk about me all day if you want, but you don't have to. Just somebody who's at your level, below your level, above, whatever. I would love to hear how you've been led. But one of the things that really stands out to me that I love, and I know you've been a recipient of these as well in the past, is it's not uncommon when I come into the office in the morning and under my door is a little note from Pastor Kent. Right. And I can tell you there's one right there. There's actually 2 or 3 in behind it. But how cool is that, right? To know that somebody else has seen your gifts and seen what you're capable of. And I find they're usually very specific and very to the point. Not trying to be flowery or trying to be extra special, but it's not uncommon where something like that is thrown under the desk or under the door to see in the morning. And I love that. I know I've encouraged you guys as staff and myself as well, volunteers, to do this as well. But hey, we've got this fantastic thing called Canada Post, right? And what a cool way. Who gets a mailed letter these days? And what a cool way to get a letter from somebody at church saying, hey, listen, I saw you do this on Sunday morning or on Tuesday night or whatever it was, or I heard from so-and-so that you're really good at this. Man, what a cool thing to get that card, just calling out something that you're really good at. So I love it. But where have you been led by these 3 things?
Yeah. I think one of the things that stands out the most to me was my time with a leader by the name of Chet Ingram, who actually came to our church and spoke at one of our gatherings, our Thrive Men's Gathering. And I've been extremely impacted by his life. And I would say so I became a Christian at the age of 16, and I was a very raw Christian. Like I was really rough, in rough shape. And I decided at the age of 18 that I was going to go off into the world and do a discipleship training school with YWAM and go tell people about Jesus, even though I had, honestly, at that point in time, the faintest idea about Jesus. My lifestyle was deplorable at best. And I just really remember during that time, Chet was so accepting of me, even as a raw recruit of a person. And his acceptance of me, just taking me for who I was, working with me, and his graciousness, his attitude of graciousness towards me. I remember we went to Poland together and we spent 6 months living there together. I remember many evenings sitting on the curb of like our street, having conversations with Chet and him just pouring wisdom into me. And I just really felt like this is a person that no matter what I can continue to, like no matter what I do, he'll always accept me and always continue to work with me. And that gave me like literally a lot of confidence just to continue to move forward. So I really commend him for that.
That's awesome. I love it. Okay. So as you've been thinking about this, here's a question that I have. Are you come from you've got some different faith background. Folks may or may not be aware of that,
Yeah.
but Scott's got, like we all do, has a different background. So do I.
I used to be a Mormon. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Scott's a Mormon. I come from not being in church. So I think I can speak to this a little bit as well. But when we think of affirmation, adoration, acceptance, do you think, this is such a weird question, but do you think Christians are better at this than Mormons or non-Christians? Now, let's paint everybody with the same brush. We know there's people who do really well. We know there's people who do really poorly. But do you think we get this better in the church?
Man, that's a hard question.
Yeah.
I feel like we should get this better in the church, in the sense that when I was a Mormon, most of my religious experience was built upon the idea that I had to do something or prove myself to my God to be accepted by him. And so it came down to a lot of performance oriented, a lot of works-based activity in my life. And when I became a Christian, one thing became very apparent to me was that God accepted me. He reached down into my life. He came to earth, died for me. And so I feel like if there's anything that we can wrap up Christianity in, is the basics of the gospel, which is these things, which is why we have this moment in Jesus's life. Yeah. So comparably, are we better at it than others? Maybe in some aspects we are, maybe in some we aren't. But I think that we certainly have an amazing example of it in Jesus, and we certainly should be better at it than others. And I think we should definitely extend the exact same thing that we've been extended by God.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, I think more than anything, I think we have to be, regardless of where we are, I think we have to be better at it. I think that's what Christ has called us to. I think scripture is start to finish, right? It's exactly what it calls us to do and to be better at. Mm-hmm. And I just think of some of I've talked about this in other ways, but I always try to reach out to our neighbors and to the people in our lives. And I take the stance of, I want to show them who Christ is before I tell them who Christ is. Yeah. And we've had a lot of fun with that when we've had neighbors. And I use this joke all the time, and it's silly, but I want people to look at us and say, man, those Divinis are really, really weird people, but I want to know more. And I want to know more because they're accepting, because they're affirming of who we are in our lifestyle. We've had neighbors who, I mean, by anybody's estimation, are making really unwise choices, but we love them. They were cool. They were fun to hang out with. We learned a ton from them. Yep. Hopefully they learned a ton from us, and just trying to show that love of Jesus, I think, is so important.
Yep. Yep. So, well, maybe just for a second here, I know we have a number of people who are listening in out there. If you're listening in, if you're wanting to join on the conversation, we would love to know if there's anyone out there. If you want to send us a chat message, if you want to maybe just get in on the conversation a little bit, you can try the hand raising function. Maybe let's try some interaction here. I see that there's Pastor Kent is out there. Maybe Pastor Kent has a few words on this or whatnot. And I'm just curious to know if there's anyone out there that has something on this.
Yeah, and as you're thinking and seeing who's available there, Scott, I'd love to have Kent jump in for a second, because he's really good at applying this and this idea of how do we affirm people, how do we adore people, how do we accept people. That's one of those things that I'd love to hear how people are going to do that, and how we can do that better, both with our family, our friends, our coworkers, our people who work for us, people we work for. I think it's so important. I think there's so many ways that we can do it, and some of them are so easy. Yeah. But I think it's one of those things that people are longing for. Yeah. When I think of that kind of that God-sized hole in me, that's exactly what fills it, is that acceptance and those other things. So,
how about you? I mean, you're teaching on this subject, but for you, what has been some of the most profound moments as related to this topic for you?
Yeah. So for me, seeing that like, I'm going to assume, so there was a couple of years ago where the church we were on staff at before, big church, whatever, I had the opportunity to preach, and I got off and I thought I preached probably one of the worst messages in my life. Yeah. Now, you know this, Scott, tell me if I'm wrong. But when you preach in a church, it's let a little bit of behind the scenes secret out. It's pretty easy to find compliments, right?
Yeah.
There's always people. Christians are super gracious. Thank you for being that way. I love it. I think it's one of those things that we're good at, but there needs to be more. Anyway, I get off stage. I think I preach the single worst message of my life. And when we're at this church, we had a sort of a producer who helped us understand whether we did a good job or a bad job. And I went to her and I said, how'd I do? She says, oh, it's fantastic. Great. Thanks. Go to our senior pastor. Oh, you're fantastic. Everybody, emails, texts, you're fantastic. But those things lasted about a half a second. And I remember getting in the car and getting home. And we had this tradition every day, every Sunday after church, we'd sit down and have lunch and having this conversation with my wife. And I'm like, so how was church today? And she's like, it was fine. I'm like, how was church today? She's like, it was good. Why? I'm like, how did I do? And she's like, oh, you were good. I'm like, sorry, good? She's like, yeah, it was good. Like, what else do you want? I'm like, I need more than that. And so just realizing that one of those people, I talked about this idea of having kind of 100 or 1,500 people, 150 people, 5 people. She's one of my 5 people. Mm-hmm. And for her to just say, oh, it was good, kind of in this, between bites way. I'm like, no, I need more than that. Like, I need you to fill me up. You're the person, you're one of the 5 people who I need to fill me up. Mm-hmm. And it's where this is one of those conversations that really started this idea for me, because I realized that it's not her responsibility to fill me up. It's actually Jesus's. And it's really more than that. It's my responsibility to believe what Jesus says about me and what Jesus feels about me. And so when I read this idea that this is how God spoke to Jesus, I think there's a reason why it's a public comment, right? I think it's public so that all of us can hear it and all of us can understand what's going on.
Yeah.
So I love it.
Yeah.
So, and go ahead.
I was going to say, well, Kent has just a few thoughts here. I think that was really good. So I think one of his points is, I like the idea of affirmation being something you think about in advance, not always easy to do, which I think is that's so Kent. Like, he's so good at doing that.
Yep.
And like you just mentioned too, like in advance, this is okay. I'm gonna spoilers here for a second. I'm going to brag on Kent, but like, this is how great Kent is at this affirmation aspect. Kent knows people well because he just takes note of them. He observes people well. The other day was my birthday. I went to Coffee Culture like I normally do. If you know me well enough, I spend way too much time there.
Yep.
I went there to buy a coffee. I get there, the lady's like, oh, hey, there's something here for you. And for sure enough, there was a gift card from Kent waiting there for me, with an affirmation on it, which was like just awesome. Like that made my entire year, not like besides my day. Like, that was just so awesome.
Yeah. And it's unique and it's tailored, and it's not just this, stock. Everybody's gotten that spam email, especially during this time we find ourselves in, right? You get an email from Radio Shack, which I think has been closed or at least renamed for 100 years. And it's like, we're for you and we know about you and we care about you. It's like, do ya?
Yeah.
So to know that it's so highly personalized is such a big thing.
Yeah. Kent also said here, I think this is good. Acceptance is a command in Romans 15:17. Based on the acceptance we receive in Christ, accepting others brings praise to God. So I think that's really good. He actually said we're going to try to bring him on here, actually.
Yeah. And while you're doing that, Scott, I'll just kind of fill some airtime here. I think it's I think it's just one of those things that we don't have to get it right, but we got to try. This idea to affirm the people around us, adore them, accept them. I think it's so important because you hear of people who are struggling, especially in this season, to know that, to wonder, are they loved? Are they cared for? I think it's so important to have people around us who are constantly shouting that in our ears that we matter to them. So,
yeah.
Hi,
welcome, Kent. Are you able to hear us, Kent?
This is riveting.
He should be able to hear us.
My internet. I'm in my gazebo, and it says
I see.
internet stable or is unstable or something. Can you hear me talking?
We can hear you.
Oh, okay.
So Ken, what do you think? Are we on to something? Are we off of something? What do you think on these 3 A's of leadership?
Brendan, I really appreciate what you shared, and I felt like the comment you just made about it being a public statement, I think is really key, and I think that's where I've wrestled with sometimes. Like, do I try to make a big thing of it by praising someone in front of someone else and then making it a big deal? And then the other times I don't do it. And then so sometimes it's nice to have it private, and sometimes it's nice to have it in front of other people. And I think God was I think you're right. He was very intentional about having it in front of other people. And so I think that shows us that it is good to set it apart and say, I'm for you. And you guys make it sound like I do this well or easily, but it's a real struggle. I think I wrote that acceptance part because I think when I don't feel like accepting someone, or it's hard for me to accept someone, I think the Bible challenges us to say, well, check yourself. Like, it's not just about, hey, I want to do this because I feel good about this, my kid, and I really want to affirm them, like someone who I really want to, it's even if you're having a hard time. So, and then it's because of the way that Jesus accepts me, that gives me the reminder that I should be accepting other people. So it is for me anyway, I find it's still a struggle often to know how to do it. And I get wrapped up in my own thinking. And I'll often have a good intention to write a note or a card or do something nice or even say something, and then I just don't. So I'm learning still, listening to the Holy Spirit prompting me. And Brendan, I just want to say, hearing you share all that stuff at the beginning and stuff, I just really appreciate the openness just about how you're feeling about things, and like even as a coworker of yours, to know your love language and, say that out loud. I really appreciate that. And I guess the other thing I struggle with the word adoration, I guess, because I'm a kind of a church kid. So that feels like that should be in a category for God. But when I look at the part where God's talking and it says, I am well pleased with you, but that is like, I'm very pleased. Like, and so and you guys are parents, you can see on your kid's face when you tell them, man, I am just smitten with you, like now, like this is great. Like, I truly do adore the kids. So that part, I mean, I and kids just soak that up, any kind of attention you give them. And I'll say one quick story. You guys are telling your stories. When I first started pastoring in Weyburn, Saskatchewan, I was a youth pastor and I preached occasionally, and this older man from the church came and said, I need to talk to you, Mr. Martins. And I was like, oh no, I'm in trouble. What did I say? Takes me aside. I actually went to the nursery. The lights were all off. It could have been like, if I was younger, it would have been like weird, but I don't know if this guy was going to fight me. He had a cane. He poked me with his cane in the chest and he goes, you have a gift. And he kind of boop, boop, boop like that. And then he said, just keep preaching. He encouraged me to speak. So I actually think back to, I think everyone who's doing something that they enjoy can think back to someone who helped them get there. So I agree with what you said there too. There is power in doing that for each other. And thanks for your reminder, Brendan. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, totally. Let me ask two. I want to say one thing, and I want to ask a question, and then Scott, you can always steer us in a different direction. But one is just to be very clear that I think there's a hierarchy to our adoration, which I alluded to it, and you gave space for it. But I just want people to hear that again. That I don't think just because Scott, in our org chart, it goes Kent, me, Scott. I don't want anybody to think that Scott's got to put me or anybody else above Jesus, above God, above Nicole, above, like, there's still a hierarchy to how this goes. So, but I just wanted to clarify that. But the other thing that I just wanted to spin us in a slightly different direction for a half a second. And so Kent, you're really good at applying things. So I'm going to put you on the spot when it comes to this idea of acceptance. And how do we accept people? Because we've all worked for people, with people, lived beside people, had people under our own roof who they just became really hard to accept. Maybe it's decisions that they're making, or really just them as a person. So how can you encourage us to accept those around us, even if they're making decisions that don't necessarily align with our worldview or just our decision-making kind of triage?
Yeah. Well, I will say this.
That's a great question.
Yeah, that's a good question. Go ahead, Kent.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's the Zoom delay.
Well, let me just say this. When I lived in Turner Valley for a while, I had a number of people in my life that I would consider to be completely opposite to the way I live my life, my worldview, and so I found that one of the most powerful things that I could do when it came to accepting them is just show that I genuinely cared through my listening. So they went through all kinds of things in their life, and I tried to be the one there for them always, to work through their pain, to be their listening ear, to be the one that sort of helped them through that. It wasn't always easy. They made choices that weren't always great for themselves, and they did really, really horrible things. But I think, I always try to remember that, I was extended grace at one point in time in my life, and I am who I am today because of that. And so just continue to asking God for help and patience a lot of the time in those people's life. And I found just being a listening ear oftentimes just was the thing that turned the tables for them, because no one really maybe wanted to listen to them, or no one maybe wanted to just explore some of their feelings, or to help them work through things, or to help them get to wise solutions. I found over time that if you do that enough, that those people start to sort of come to rely on you in a way of maybe being just a voice of trust in their life. This is a joke one time, but so one time, a couple of mine, so these are not Christians whatsoever. They went to a party, they had too much to drink. And so they were thinking, well, we don't want to drive home. Like, what are we going to do? Well, we can call Scott because he's always reliable. So it was like in the middle of the night, I went and picked them up because I didn't want them to drive home. I also didn't want them in a compromised situation. And I was willing to just go and help them out of that situation. I went and picked them up. On the way home, in their stupor, one of them jokingly said, man, if we ever have a child, we're totally giving it to you. And it was a very inappropriate comment, but what it showed was like, that I had earned a level of respect and trust just because I had chosen to serve them and go beyond my own preferences at times, and to listen to them and to show, and through those actions, it just showed genuine care. Maybe you have something to add to that, Kent.
No, what you covered is great. The only thing I guess I would say would be that like accepting a person doesn't mean that you have to condone all their behavior, and you don't want to lead with all your. I have a hard time making sure they don't. I worry too much about that they think I condone them, and I want to get that out there. But that almost undermines the whole connection that you're trying to build with them. But if you just connect with them, then they think that everything that they're doing is fine. That's not quite the thing either. And I would say it gets dangerous even if you were to say, well, I'm supposed to accept this person. I'm letting them walk all over me, or they're going to hurt me or hurt my kids or take money from me, or like. So I think the other counter to this acceptance thing is having boundaries where you just go, you know what, I'm thinking interpersonally. Now that doesn't apply with kids, but just thinking of people with different lifestyles. I think it's really hard to convey an accepting attitude without being judgy toward the things lifestyle wise that if you don't, it's not kind of what you're trying to approve. And I think Jesus erred on the side of showing affirmation more so than showing his displeasure with lifestyle. So and I don't think we're as good at that for sure. I think we fall off one side or the other too much, but it is a good tension to talk about, I think.
Yeah. And I will say this, as we relate to boundaries and things like that, join us in exactly 167 hours from now. So next Tuesday, same time, same place, same bat channel. We'll dig into some of that stuff as it relates to leadership. So
yeah. Well, I think we should wrap up there. And thanks so much, Brendan, for putting together this resources. Thanks so much, Kent, for coming on and joining us here at the last minute. Just a quick shout out to all of those who are listening. Please tell everyone else that we're doing these May sessions. They're free. Anyone can come and join us. We're going to be doing them Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursdays at 7 p.m. You can just go to our website, at eefc.ca and join, or you can go to eefc.ca/events and join. Or you can just contact us at info@eefc.ca, and we can always give you more information about how these happen. So,
and they're going to be on the website to watch after as well, right, Scott? Or
yes, for sure. You bet. Yep, we're going to make those available afterwards. Yeah. Cool. Well, thanks so much for everyone joining us tonight. Have a great rest of your night.